Sometimes I start writing these articles and immediately feel like I'm going back to middle school essay classes. I almost started this piece off with a question. You know that feeling when a song transports you to a different time? And was immediately transported back to my 7th grade class where Mrs. Redacted told me to use one of my super creative opening lines from this photocopied sheet of paper. The paper wasn't even an original. It was one of those pages that you know she lost her original copy, so she would photocopy her copy. You always knew when that happened because the version you got would have a hole punch mark on it. This is all besides the point. I wanted to start this essay off by talking about certain little actions, smells, sounds, whatever, and how they can transport you to a different time of life. Kind of like starting this essay made me think fondly of my 7th grade English class. You often hear people talk about this evocation of memories in regards to music. We in the biz call this nostalgia. And nostalgia can be a pretty powerful emotion, right? It's the reason you get back together with your ex over and over again. You hope to get back to that time when you were happy, reaching for that nostalgia to lean on, instead of realizing it's just not gonna work, sweetie. Or the reason why going home for the holidays can feel so good for people. This doesn't apply to those of us who came from divorced families. But I've seen a Hallmark Christmas movie or two in my time, and I get how it's supposed to work. A smell, a song, seeing a certain old friend can push you backwards, helping you remember the good times. What's easier to forget, though, are the bad things. And that's pretty fucking typical, right? It's always so easy to look back and say, gee whiz, that was a bop of a fucking time, but in reality, you were broke. Maybe you hated your roommates. Maybe your job was a nightmare. Whatever it was, we're sort of conditioned to remember the good, for better or worse. One of the things I feel the most nostalgic about, and sort of refuse to acknowledge the bad about, is my intense interest in Xmen. I remember watching the 2000 Xmen movie for the first time, and it went a little something like this. Me, wandering downstairs in a darkened house on a rainy evening, on the weekend. Context, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and it's nearly always dark and gloomy. I was sneaking downstairs for some snacks before disappearing to play solitaire by myself. I became distracted while pulling sweets from the pantry because the flicker of the television beckoned from the living room. I half stomped into the room where my stepdad was reclined in his leather chair. "This is a violent part. You might not want to watch," he said, and turned back to the television. I rolled my eyes, sucking on a spoonful of creamy peanut butter, and watched as a man with pointy hair fidgeted in bed. A young woman with a white strip of hair leans over the thrashing nightmare-having man who sits upright and stabs her through the chest with his hand spears. We ended up watching the movie again the next weekend, where I got to see it from the beginning. The cage fight with Wolverine, the emotional introduction of Magneto, that moment where Wolverine calls Professor X Wheels.
Storm. What do they call you? Wheels?
Which is both funny and weirdly insensitive, and also a joke regarding their silly, ridiculous nicknames. But anyway, after this, my stepdad and I watched the X-Men movies together. I was pulled out of school on Fridays every time a new movie was released, so my stepdad and I could go see the newest film together. It became one of the few things we had in common, besides sports. My stepdad and I still, to this day, share an interest in movies. However, we do have pretty differing preferences. Eventually, in college, I took an English class that focused entirely on superheroes. Why does this college class exist? I did my final project for the quarter on Wolverine. It was an entire essay about the power of an anti-hero. It was one of my favorite projects. I read comics, tried to keep origin stories straight, read papers on all of it, and I can't speak to the quality of the essay anymore. It's been a while, but the point here is that X-Men really stuck with me. You could likely argue that this band of misfits and marginalized characters was so beloved because people of all ages could see themselves in the characters. They saw these different characters that they could relate to, and trying to pick your favorite X-Men character is always fun. Everyone wanted to have Nightcrawler's powers, but let's be real, most of us would just be fucking Zeitgeist or something, just vomiting up on shit all the time. And then there's this part of me that really doesn't want to admit all the bad things about the series. Part of it is that I wanted it to be good. I wanted the whole movie franchise to be solid and fun and interesting, but I think I can finally admit that the majority of these films kind of fell short. One of the biggest things the franchise suffered from was poor writing. Poor writing trickles down into every corner of the films. It means the actors aren't getting good parts, which makes things feel disingenuous. They're also undeveloped, like Gambit or Darwin, and the Darwin argument has been echoed multiple times. My significant other, even the other night, was talking about this article and how bummed he was that Darwin's build-up and quick death in the series bummed him out. We were spoon-fed his background, and then they turned around and booted him in the same movie. Gambit is undeniably a fan favorite too. We only got small glimpses of him in the franchise. Teasers can be fun for fans, but you can't wave such a beloved character at us with no chance of interaction. The poor writing is also reflected in the inconsistent storylines as well. It's maybe an oversimplified argument to say, well, comic book storylines are scattered too, but in a cinematic universe, your audience broadens, so giving viewers a storyline that's both complex but easy to follow is crucial. We get a wonderful example out of the MCU, where each character is complicated and has meaningful relationships and stories, but they come together in a really palatable way for fans. The story doesn't need to be dumbed down. Audiences can sense when they're being pandered to, but they need to keep some kind of consistency. There are plenty of examples of poorly developed writing and character development in this franchise, but lingering on it would take quite a while. And frankly, I'm already 3 pages into 5. Moving forward, the whole slew of films seems afraid of camp, as in campiness. They avoid the vibrancy and individuality that we so often see in the comics, and even the television show from the 90s. If you are a fan of the show or any of the comics, you're familiar with the color blue, the slash of yellow, and their big-ass hair. That's part of what makes the comics so fun. It's an overt ability to be over the top. So why don't the movies lean into that? We get a few moments from Wolverine. Well, there's a lot of W's in this sentence. We get a few moments from Wolverine where he'll joke about the costumes. And then they only ever run around in matching black leather and some blue fitted sporty running jackets. I may be alone in this, but having some reveal moments of true comic book glory would be an incredibly good time. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a really good example of embracing silliness in a comic to film adaptation. Edgar Wright slams his foot on the gas, including songs, speech bubbles, wonderful costuming, truly quirky dialogue, and a great cast. The movie embraces this stylistic world. They focus on the right things, in my opinion. There's no reason that the X-Men franchise couldn't have relied on more facets of the comic book culture. Okay, I can't not say it. There are 2 Phoenix movies. Why? Why did that happen? Why do I have to pretend I'm restarting the series so many times? I feel like I'm watching the Halloween series when I think about the Phoenix movies. I'm supposed to just pretend the last 6 movies you made didn't happen? I'm supposed to sit here, watch this reboot, and pretend that Tyra Banks was never in a version of the movie? I can't do that. I won't do that. It's just a lot to ask from an audience, especially if you do it, really badly twice. The first one, The Last Stand, was just unfortunate. And when compared to X-Men and X2, it was kind of a disaster. While it was visually appealing, it was rushed and paced so awkwardly. Then, we had to put ourselves through the travesty that was The Dark Phoenix with Sophie Turner as Jean. Not only is it bad casting, but it was bad acting, and I found the movie nearly unwatchable at some points. I wasn't mesmerized like I had been so early on. A lot of people lurking around the internet also think that if the franchise had been allowed the R rating versus the PG-13, then it could have been a better opportunity to thrive. But Fox executives pushed hard against the ratings and wanted to keep a larger pool of people watching. It's a common issue with movie adaptations of books or comics. The film isn't given the rating it deserves, and thus the movie does a major disservice to the fans and viewers by being inaccurate or falling short in many aspects. I could potentially go on and on about this series of films, why they're good, why they're bad. There's certainly plenty of YouTuber videos out there talking about this topic already. I'm just sort of another one. For quite some time, though, I felt defensive of the entire set of films. They fell into this sacred category of movies that I pouted like a child about and wouldn't relent when people questioned their quality. But I'm finally ready to be a bigger person and admit I was wrong. I think for a long time, I thought that maybe the original movies were also bad. I thought that maybe the movies aged poorly, and I only thought they were good because I was a kid when I first saw them. However, I strongly contest that being untrue. The first 2 movies were really great. Aside from Halle Berry's weird "what happens to a frog when it's hit by lightning" thing that everyone quotes thanks Joss Whedon.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
No one really likes Joss anymore, right? Those two movies really nailed the alternate way of approaching the films and making them modern for the time being. We got this darker side of Logan, a complicated set of relationships and really cool backstories that you craved more of. The newer movies don't hold my attention as much. I didn't like Jennifer Lawrence as Raven/Mystique. Her costume and makeup was ever-changing to the point of discomfort. The bromance with Charles and Eric was really charming. In hindsight, though, the mark was often missed, and those problems with consistencies and characterization choices made the series fall flatter than hoped for. Through all of this, it's important to acknowledge your nostalgia, though. Nostalgia is super important, and I'm glad to adore a franchise and a set of characters so much. Maybe it's best to finally get a fresh start, and we can be hopeful for a better representation in the future. We can also hope that my 7th grade teacher finally gives kids a better sheet of how to write an introduction examples. I mean, come on, you can't just sit around recopying this page forever. Then you'll never be able to open up new tactics, new stories, and new concepts. At this point, we just need better openings and a fresh take on X-Men.